The foundation of any society lies in its education system.
Education is one of the most important weapons in a country.
It shapes minds, molds futures, and determines the trajectory of a nation's progress.
With the right education, you can learn how to be a better human being,
pushing the entirety of humanity forward. But that begs the question, what happens when this education system becomes poisoned? When an education system is corrupted? Well, after understanding how the modern education system was built and how it's slowly been poisoned over decades, a big realization hits you that our education system may very well be stifling human progress and human potential. All the destiny inside of you and all the billions of people throughout decades of history who've had their lives ruined and societies numbed by it. Universities, schools, nurseries around the world, all the teachers, students and people who have passed through them. The decades of lies, soul-destroying manipulation, all the repression that has come from the corruption of our education system, and how this has altered science, creativity, and human potential, all by the slow poisoning of our education system. And when you realize this benefits only select few people throughout all of history, you start to realize that the destruction of our education system might be one of the most disastrous things that's happened in mankind's history. The question is, who are these people who have poisoned the education system? And what effects is it having today? Well, to understand this, we need to go back in time to really piece together how the education system we know today was first built. Now, like I mentioned earlier, education is often regarded as the bedrock of societal progress, and it has undergone significant transformations over centuries. From the Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, the Renaissance era has led up to the standard American education system across the world. The American education system is the pillar of how modern schools and universities are built. So then who designed this education system? Well, the genesis of the American education system can be traced back as far as the Prussian Empire, a region that now lies within modern-day Germany. The Prussians, after their conquest of Poland in the late 18th century, faced a unique challenge, integrating a diverse and resistant Polish populace into their empire. The solution was ingenious, yet insidious. The Prussian government targeted the youth, recognizing that molding young minds was easier than changing established adult beliefs. The Prussian education system was meticulously crafted to serve the state. Spanning 8 years, it emphasized obedience, patriotism, and respect for authority. The curriculum was not designed to foster creativity or encourage dissent. How would that benefit the Prussians at all? Rather, it aimed to produce citizens who would never challenge the status quo or question the empire's authority. This model of education then quickly caught the attention of Horace Mann, an American educational reformer during the 19th century. Mann was impressed by this Prussian system, at the efficiency and conformity that the Prussian state was generating. And Horace saw this as a blueprint for America, as he believed that such a system could unify the diverse American populace and instill a shared sense of national identity during the period of the American Civil War. This was what America needed, and how it would forge its new national identity. Parallel to the government's interests, the late 19th century also saw the rise of industrial magnates like John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie. In this period, the Industrial Revolution was in full swing, and there was a pressing need for a workforce that could fuel all these burgeoning industries across America. However, the largely agrarian American society at the time lacked the disciplined wage-slave mentality that these industries demanded. They needed factory workers, people who could run the machines but never question their place in the factory. Rockefeller recognized the potential of the Prussian-inspired American education system and saw an opportunity.
I studied a lot about like Rockefeller, Carnegie, guys like that.
Yes.
And those guys, nobody's amassed the fortunes those guys had. Rockefeller had like 336 billion in today's dollars.
Good Lord.
Yeah, Carnegie had 372 billion. This was the first generation of like the first generation of entrepreneurs. You know, the country was new, all of these industries were just emerging, and these guys took it over.
He could try to influence the American education system with this new Prussian style of connecting Americans across state lines and generating a national identity, all while secretly using this for personal means. And so with the assistance of close confidants like Friedrich Gates, he established the General Education Board. With an investment that would be equivalent to billions today, they then began to shape the curriculum, ensuring it produced workers with the basic skills required for industrial jobs. And the emphasis was clear. The system should produce workers, not thinkers. As Rockefeller himself stated, "I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers." Following this, he opened hundreds of schools, invested millions into the education system, trained thousands of teachers, and improved literacy rates across the country. He even rolled out a mass treatment program for hookworm, an incredibly common parasite at the time. But despite the benefits, Rockefeller wasn't doing this out of the good of his heart, obviously. Just look at another quote from his organization's dream for rural Americans, and you'll get some idea of of what his true intentions were. In our dream, we have limitless resources, and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hand. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning, or men of science. We shall not search for great artists, painters, musicians, nor lawyers, doctors, preachers, politicians, statesmen. The task we set before ourselves is very simple, as well as a very beautiful one: to train these people as we find them to a perfect ideal life just where they are, making it perfectly clear that human progress and human potential was not on these cards for the industrial magnates. They wanted docile sheep. And over time, Rockefeller and his sons, amongst other industrialists, would spend over hundreds of millions making the sinister dream come true. Mixing the Prussian method of schooling, they also made schools seem like factories, or more specifically, production lines. On the surface, this meant that long and grueling hours would be the same, as well as the rigid structure. The school bell and its role in partitioning time into work periods was directly based on the factory whistle. But the most impactful decision was treating the children like products on a factory line. Each year of their lives, and ours as well, was partitioned into grades of study, with strict exams and requirements before the next stage. This was the template that America and the rest of the world adopted, in large part thanks to the Rockefellers. But it wasn't just the Rockefellers who were going to shape the modern education system as we know it today. You see, Andrew Carnegie is incredibly famous for his contributions to the American education system, particularly his funding of libraries and universities. Many places are named after him in the States, as he came to be one of the biggest philanthropists for educational institutions, being famous for over 100 years in America for being the helping hand the country needed to educate its populace. And yet, just like the Rockefellers, Carnegie's motivations here weren't exactly as they seem, and when you dig a little further into this, you realize how corrupting he was to the world's education. You see, the steel mills and industries that bolstered Carnegie's fortune were infamous for their grueling working conditions. Workers were subjected to extended hours in perilous environments, receiving meager pay and hardly any rights, working non-stop every single day of the week, all for no pay, painful labor, with nothing to show for it. And whilst he is famous now for his generous educational donations, if you really look into it, he was just using this to fuel his empire and get enough workers on board, because he quickly realized he didn't have enough manpower. Without people skilled enough to work in the factories or use the machines that were necessary, he wouldn't be able to further grow his monopoly. He needed manpower that were educated enough to use the machines, but too docile to think for themselves. And so every time he would give out these big donations, he always had these specific visions about the structure and delivery of this education, and his donations frequently mandated institutions to conform to these visions. And it was this exertion of his influence that meant Carnegie played a pivotal role in shaping the direction and priorities of many educational establishments, literally curbing innovation and doing everything he could to stop any educational paradigms that might actually help the populace think for themselves. But in some cases, Carnegie did donate money to real education, with the funding of libraries and private educational establishments in certain areas. But again, his focus on particular private wealthy connected educational institutions and causes meant that his family, friends, and other magnates' children would be educated, a perfect way to network with political families and other industrialists. But the masses would then be taught what was necessary for his factories only. They wouldn't receive the same kind of funding. And that ensured that most of America, where the workers came from, would be force-fed controlled education, being given the public educational system treatment. And any school or educational establishments that didn't go along with this would then remain underfunded and eventually unable to function properly due to not teaching what Carnegie wanted. And so this forced teachers and schools to fall under the thumb of his wishes. Questions like, what are your true passions? What do you aspire to achieve in life? What motivates you to start the new day with enthusiasm? These questions were stamped out of the educational system. And that's why today, you likely spent the majority of your formative years confined to a desk, learning to conform, wearing a uniform, and settling for mediocrity, eagerly awaiting each break until the next ring of the alarm, working 9 to 5 hours almost every single day of your childhood, teaching you to never value your time, to never value your own intuition, and get used to monotonous, mass-produced, and insincere education that is constantly shoved down your throat. Your only refuge was the illusion of productivity at home, where you were then forced to go back home, do your work tasks, and have only a couple hours spare, where your energy has been depleted, where you can't do anything other than play games or do something to numb yourself with. You see, instead of nurturing your creativity, your whole childhood, 18 years of your life, was devoted to learning fragmented, forgettable information. In fact, unschooled children, people who were never put through any educational establishment, often catch up with their school peers when they reach college and even outperform them. And that's when you start to realize that our current educational system functions more as a daycare than to train children how to think. Spending 8 or 9 hours a day within a structured, regimented environment akin to a military prison where even bathroom breaks require permission, robbing you of your independence and stifling your critical thinking skills, all pioneered by these industrial magnates who never wanted a free-thinking populace. Walt Whitman, the great American poet, cautioned against this years ago, suggesting that unquestioning obedience leads to enslavement of a population. And yet today's society, especially in the West, seems to have drifted away from this ideal. The public school system is always seen as providing free and compulsory education, being one of the bedrocks of Western society, and yet more and more critics come out against it.
Well, we're so enamored with this idea of working. We're so enamored with this idea of getting a job. We're so enamored with this idea of the structure of civilization as it stands in 2019 is the way to go. So we're teaching kids how to complete this life that they're born into, the way it's established for their parents, the way it's established for their neighborhood. Get in your car, drive to work all day, come home, to essentially be as miserable as everybody else before them, doing the exact same thing that everybody else has done. Like
people like John Taylor Gatto, Noam Chomsky, suggesting that public schooling doesn't necessarily teach individuals how to think, but rather conditions them for conformity, which isn't really a stretch when you look at the history of the education system, because the aim of public education is not enlightenment, but standardization.
I think there's no question it's completely obsolete. The education system is a path-dependent outcome from the need for daycare, from the need for prisons for college-age males who would otherwise overrun society and cause a lot of havoc. The original medieval universities had guard towers that faced inwards, for example.
Albert Einstein, one of the great minds in history, was a critic of this system. He believed that the forced style of teaching stifled creativity and curiosity, as his experiences reflected a broader trend where many eminent individuals from various fields found the schooling system suffocating and inhibitive, stifling their creativity. And this isn't just happening to the education system. The mainstream media, another bedrock of Western society, does the exact same thing. That's why people like Nietzsche and Richard Weaver have always expressed skepticism about the media's role in shaping public opinion. Noam Chomsky in his book Media Control claims that the media is dominated by elitist ideologies, viewing the masses as a bewildered herd just like the education system. And you see, this control isn't just about maintaining order, but preserving institutional structures that benefit an elite few. And this isn't just happening in America. In almost all of the world this is happening. And the Soviet Union was a perfect example of this, as they placed a strong emphasis on education and scientific research. They were committed to intellectual development, and you can see this just looking at the stats. In 1897, in Imperial Russia, 28% of the population was illiterate. By 1937, this number had dramatically decreased, with 75% of the USSR's population being literate. The Soviet era was marked by free and accessible education for all citizens, a legacy that continues in almost all post-Soviet countries today, and even Russia itself, along with China. And this emphasis on education wasn't just limited to basic literacy. The Soviets heavily invested in science and technology, believing that through the power of science, they could address the challenges brought about by their communist regime. The USSR was home to some of the world's best chess players, and they led the space race in many aspects until the moon landing. Their government heavily funded new technologies from nuclear power plants to intercontinental ballistic missiles, and we see the same thing in China. The population is one of the most educated in the world, the standards far above any standard in the West. Children's formal education far exceeds anything we've seen in history. However, again, just like the West, this education isn't as simple as it first seems. While these governments value education and scientific research, they also actively suppress alternative ideas and opinions that threaten the regime's authority. The Soviet government is infamous for its censorship, with literary work often facing heavy scrutiny and alteration, people being blurred out of the images. Speaking out against the government could lead to severe consequences, including exile to Siberia or a bad social credit score.
Wake up before sunrise, sleep after midnight. It's a typical day for students who are prepping for China's most competitive exam, the National College Entrance Examination.
And this extended to the scientific community as well. Researchers were often limited in their pursuits, only allowed to explore areas that aligned with the government's goals. And this stifling environment led to tension between creativity and innovation. For instance, genetics, a foundation science, was declared a bourgeoisie pseudoscience during the USSR, leading to the persecution of thousands of biologists. And in China today, we see Google, any social media, any form of actually having publicly accessible information completely censored into silence.
Websites such as Google, YouTube, and Facebook are either blocked completely or slowed to a crawl and throttled to an almost unusable state. Known as the Great Firewall of China, this censorship engine allows the Chinese government to regulate the internet and protect its citizens from dangerous content.
With these countries being extremely good at learning what they're supposed to learn, but never questioning the barriers of their education, with high-ranking Communist Party officials' children having far easier access to this information, going to the best educational institutions, and seeing outside of their government's paradigms. But it's not like this sort of thing has just been happening in communist countries like China and the former Soviet Union. The roots of our current education system are clear: to create factory workers rather than thinkers. So then why hasn't this changed? The system has been the same for over a century, and yet nobody has bothered to make any reforms or changes to a system meant to benefit a few select industrialists. Industrialists from over a century ago. Of course, we don't have people getting hit by the teachers and some curriculum changes have been made, but the structure, purpose, and corruption of education remains the same. Schools aren't trying to enlighten you or save your soul. It's all about control. The more you commit to a government-sanctioned ideology, the more your soul is poisoned. And we see this in small ways across schools in the West, where books like Roald Dahl's children books are being put through demented purity filters, where all bad words and paragraphs are rewritten. Words like witches turn to hags, fat turn to ginormous, black person to dark, cloud men to cloud people. Entire sections rewritten to eliminate any wrongthink. This is happening everywhere. Just recently, a UK government-backed report claimed that reading George Orwell's 1984 was a sign of, quote, extremism. Yes, the government was quite literally categorizing people who read 1984 as potential enemies of the state. And just recently, a public school in England was in controversy for interactions between two students and a teacher, as the teacher gave an aggressively demented lecture to two 13-year-old girls about how the two girls weren't accepting that their classmate was actually a cat.
How dare you? You just really upset someone. Saying things like should be in an asylum.
I didn't say that. I just said if they want to identify as a cat or something, then they're like genuinely unwell.
And because these girls wouldn't accept that their classmate was a cat, the teacher's rage exploded in front of the class. And this insane nonsense is growing by the day, and is all part of a much larger process, coming from the very heart of educational research, the universities, who for decades and decades have been warping our society through twisted so-called progressive thinking that has shaped government policy today. At school, we are always told to conform, be obedient, repress your masculinity, so that you may possibly have a chance of going to a university, as you're told your whole life that you need a degree in order to get a job to survive. In turn, taking a bunch of jobs that don't need degrees at all, with university education being almost completely pointless for said role, and forcing students to take hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt to get a low-level job that doesn't even need a degree in the first place, or to be taught by people that can tell you things companies, governments, and investors want you to think. Children aren't just being turned from boy to geek to drone. New Mills School, located in Derbyshire's rural Peak District, announced a non-uniform day on June 16th to commemorate Pride Month. The theme? Drag queens. In a letter to parents, the school encouraged students to participate by wearing attire ranging from tutus, makeup, and painted nails to full-blown drag costumes. Prizes were then promised for the best drag queen attire. Additionally, the school set up drag stations where students of any gender could apply glitter, eyeshadow, or paint their nails. The event's scale this year was notably larger than the previous year, which was relatively low-key, involving non-uniform attire and a few cupcakes. The emphasis on drag as the central theme this year is completely insane. Critics argue that while drag, a highly sexualized parody of women, may be suitable for some stage performances, it's not really appropriate for school settings.
There were many protesters outside denouncing this forum as inappropriate and even grooming.
But it doesn't end there. The school invited Sab Samuel, a drag queen associated with the Drag Queen Story Hour UK, to discuss suicide with the students, with many raising genuine concerns about this decision, emphasizing that discussions about such sensitive topics should probably be led by trained professionals in a completely different environment. And it gets even weirder when you look at his past actions and statements. He once dressed completely inappropriately for a child-friendly setting. Additionally, he also stated on Twitter, "Love has no age," which made things even creepier. And this decision to invite Samuel, especially on a day when students as young as 11 are encouraged to dress as drag queens, makes it even more clear how much propaganda has infested these schools. And this really isn't a one-off. Kids are being taught by teachers about sex education from as young as 4 years old. A recent report from The Telegraph revealed the inappropriate content being taught to children, which includes instances where children were asked to create explicit drawings, being told that adult entertainment is essential for sexual experiences, and praising those young children who consider gender transitions. As Miriam Cates writes for The Telegraph, in 2019, the Department of Education Education mandated an RSC framework to assist children in navigating modern Britain's complexities. However, the current state of sex education is so dystopian, with completely vague and inconsistent guidelines, where teachers are forced to tell children facts about gender identity, even though this is more a political debate than a clear legal standing, dementally teaching children to be more sexual, ruining the innocence of their childhood, constantly emphasizing consent is everything to children who can't even give consent. This isn't about being conservative, it's about safeguarding children. But if you thought this kind of thing was happening to the elite's children, you'd be very mistaken. You see, there's another path of education for the children of the elite. Now, as I mentioned earlier, many of these industrialists and other rulers of our society have always inhabited a world vastly different from the majority, residing in exclusive neighborhoods, enjoying privileges that expedite their experiences, having access to resources that most can only dream of, a world of luxury. But the most glaring difference, however, lies in their educational experiences. While the majority of us attend schools designed to make us factory workers with standardized tests and teachers that destroy our passions in life, the elite attend institutions that nurture their curiosity, discipline, and passions. These schools don't just educate, they indoctrinate students with the belief that they are destined for greatness. In these elite institutions and schools, students aren't really burdened with subjects they have no interest in. Instead, they are encouraged to value their time, follow their passions, and develop a specialized knowledge that allows them to follow their destiny in life, preparing them for leadership roles in the future. And even more creepy is how the doors to esteemed universities like Harvard and Yale swing open effortlessly for them. In my own experience in the United Kingdom, many people I knew at a very expensive private school would get backdoor access to the admissions offices at places like Oxford and Cambridge, allowing many of the richest and top students to get into these institutions without really any good grades. I mean, it's no surprise that the children of leaders like Chuck Schumer, Barack Obama, and Hillary Clinton have all attended these prestigious institutions. Almost all of the top politicians, rulers, and billionaires have had all of their kids in an Ivy League school. And yet for the average person, gaining admission into such universities requires exceptional talent and often against all odds.
That children from wealthy families are more likely to be admitted to elite schools than the average applicant.
Most regular children have less than a 3% chance in getting access to these high-class Ivy League universities. Yet for the elite, admission always seems guaranteed, regardless of any discernible talent or achievement. Just recently, a federal judge ruled in favor of Harvard University, stating that its admission policy does not infringe upon the Civil Rights Act. Although this ruling could be challenged on appeal, the judge, probably connected to the elites, dismissed allegations of the university setting a higher bar for Asian American applicants. But then quickly afterwards, a newly published study by several economists, one of whom was directly engaged in the trial, sheds light on a contrasting scenario, as their paper highlighted that Harvard in fact does exhibit favoritism towards the wealthy via legacy preferences and sports recruitment practices. The study delved into the admission data from 2009 to 2014, revealing that at least 35% of students admitted were categorized as ALDC, Athletes Legacy's Dean's List, indicating a relation to donors or offspring of faculty members. The researchers argued that without these preferences, around 75% of these students would have faced rejection. I've seen it myself firsthand, and it's no surprise that when you look at the elites, their children are always at places like Stanford and Harvard. And it's these backroom deals, the corruption that happens behind the scenes, where big donors, investors, people with money and influence who game the admissions process are also the ones creating institutional corruption that is rotting society at its core. You see, traditionally the university experience was always seen as a bastion of free thought, open discourse, and the pursuit of knowledge. And yet today, more and more, we're seeing books, newspapers, any thought that is deemed bad being censored into silence. The University of Cambridge, one of the world's most prestigious institutions, has recently been uncovered to be completely corrupted by Advanced AG, a charity organization at the front of incentivizing universities to integrate certain woke visions into their institutional fabric. Through schemes like the Athena Swan Charter and the Race Equality Charter, Advanced AG encourages universities to make structural changes in teaching, research, appointments, and admissions. While the organization's principles may seem university agreeable in the abstract, their practical implementation has raised concerns amongst some academics, as one of the most contentious issues right now on most campuses is that free speech is being eroded, and because this is being eroded in universities, it's now starting to be eroded in all aspects of society. And at Cambridge in particular, one of the world's best universities, there's a growing sentiment amongst many that certain non-woke viewpoints are being suppressed in the name of inclusivity and diversity. But to gain a deeper understanding of the influence of Advanced HE and its charters on academic institutions, we need to take a look deeper at what they're actually doing. Infamously, the Athena Swan Charter, one of Advanced HE's initiatives, encourages universities to promote a collective understanding that anyone can determine their gender identity. Whilst this might seem harmless on the surface, questions arise about the practical implications of such a directive. Does this mean there are restrictions on academic syllabuses or potential disciplinary actions against certain research types? Does this interfere with the teachings of these universities? Another example was their Race Equality Charter. And again, whilst this overarching principles might seem universally acceptable, the methods universities employ to align with these principles can be questionable. One such method is implicit bias training, which, despite its popularity, has shown limited efficacy, because this training often requires staff to acknowledge their biases, even when there's no concrete evidence that these biases even influence processes like admissions. More concerning is their push for anti-racism training, which sometimes promotes specific ideological perspectives, such as the concept of white fragility, permeating this across the entire culture of universities across the country. And this is training the future leaders of our world, the people at Cambridge, to hold these views too, with the introduction of concepts like safe spaces. And this is where the woke agenda starts to begin. It is spawned at these universities that have been corrupted by these so-called charities and other shady organizations that invest tons of money into these institutions, altering the way they teach their students. And with the ongoing cultural shifts we see today, driven in part by organizations like Advanced HE, this is posing challenges to the legacy of institutional establishments like Cambridge and Oxford. And because of this, it has finally been announced that there is an upcoming freedom of speech higher education bill that the UK government is passing, which aims to promote a culture of academic freedom and free speech, because the government started to realise how serious of an issue this was. But it does still seem a very long way off, and over the pond in America, it's even worse, as even North Korean refugees are shocked by the censorship and repression at these universities.
I think this phenomenon is really everywhere, especially in the Ivy League education system in America, that it really reminded me of that. In North Korea, you just don't know who is listening. Even 5 years ago, it wasn't this bad, I think, I remember. Now, really, like, you have to watch out who's a racist, who says what.
For example, Yeonmi Park, a North Korean refugee whose early life was marked by extreme hardship, scavenging for dragonflies and grasshoppers to survive. She eventually seeked a better life, and driven by hunger, she and her mother escaped to China. In China, Park witnessed her mother being raped, and both were sold into sex slavery. Park's mother was sold for $65, while Park, being a virgin child, fetched a higher price. As they were trafficked around in China for at least 2 years, they finally met some missionaries from South Korea, and with their guidance, Park and her mother embarked on a perilous journey across the frozen Gobi Desert to Mongolia. From Mongolia, they were assisted to South Korea, where Park finally tasted freedom. So having escaped the clutches of North Korean dictatorship, dystopian communist rule, and Chinese oppression, Park finally gained higher education at Columbia University in the US, a well-renowned Ivy League university, one of the best in the country. However, her experiences were quite shocking, as Park observed a very disturbing trend among students and professors who somehow seemed to romanticize communism and socialism. She found it ironic that in a country that epitomizes freedom and opportunity, there were so many individuals at the core of America's education who were advocating for ideologies that have historically led to oppression and suffering. She likened the environment at Columbia University to a cult where diverse opinions are never welcomed. The emphasis, she notes, is on diversity of skin color and not on the diversity of thought.
They talk about oppression, they keep telling me they're oppressed, and America is horrible, that we need to destroy this country. I was asking them, what about America that you hate so much? They say we have inequality in this country. In North Korea, we don't have inequality, we are dying from starvation. Like AOC says, what's yours is mine. That's what Columbia professor is saying. We need to steer from all these rich people, and everything should be free, and everything, we need to destroy the country in the name of equity and fairness. And that same ideology made into North Korea what it is today. And that's why I escaped from that country.
That leads to socialism. That leads to communism. I mean,
that's real socialism.
What you hear, yeah.
She was particularly taken aback by the concept of safe spaces in the universities, where she felt stifled free speech and open discourse, by students and professors who are enamored by ideologies that have caused immense suffering in countries like where she escaped, continually highlighting the hypocrisy of those who denounce issues in the US but remain silent on the grave human rights abuses in countries like China, where Uyghurs are being put in concentration camps.
To 1.8 million Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities have been sent to the camps since 2017. A series of classified bulletins show how easy it is to be singled out by the Chinese government for education and training. Simply using a certain app or communicating with people overseas can draw suspicion. But then last year, she criticized China during a public panel in Washington.
6 days after I talked, my sister and my aunt both got abducted on the same day as a retaliation for my activism.
And also being terrified to ever speak her thoughts due to fears of getting the wrong pronouns or having a bad thought that the teacher in the classroom would shun her for. This was around the same time as the Evergreen State College controversy, which erupted in 2017. The incident, which gained significant media attention, stemmed from a long-standing event at the college known as the Day of Absence. Traditionally, this event saw people of color voluntarily abstaining from attending work towards separate race discussions. However, in 2017, the event was altered, requesting white individuals not to come to campus. This change sparked significant debate and backlash, particularly from faculty members who felt it was inappropriate to ask any group based on race to abstain from attending a public institution. One faculty member who became the focal point of the controversy expressed his discomfort with being told he couldn't teach his class due to his race. This sentiment was met with accusations of racism from students, many of whom he had never even met, and all of this was captured on video, with students demanding his resignation or termination.
Resign. What? Resign. Resign. Okay.
However, the Day of Absence incident was merely the tip of the iceberg here. Beneath the surface, there were deeper institutional issues at play. The college's new president, George Bridges, had proposed a series of policies aimed at restructuring the institution. Among these was a proposal that every faculty hire should be justified based on its potential to address inequality. This meant that hiring decisions could prioritize activism over academic qualifications, potentially compromising the quality of education. Another policy suggested that every graduate should be equally capable across all metrics, a goal that, while noble in intent, is completely unrealistic, proven to be false, and a dystopian ideological dream, completely destroying competition and destroying talent. But the whole controversy shed a light on the broader challenges facing universities today. They are being corrupted by their donors and their professors. Socialism is plaguing them everywhere, and it begs the question, who even are these professors anyway? And are they really the beacons of truth in our society? Which brings us to people like Dan Ariely. Known for his riveting TED Talks and best-selling books, Ariely has been celebrated for his groundbreaking research that merges cognitive psychology with business management. His work has provided insights into how cognitive biases influence economic decision-making, offering both scholars and the general public a fresh perspective on human behavior, teaching students across the world this new groundbreaking movement in behavioral economics. Up until now, as recent revelations have raised some very big questions about the integrity of most of his studies. Ariely's research has often been characterized by surprising and counterintuitive findings. One such study, which became a cornerstone of his research, investigated the impact of placing an honesty pledge at the top of a form versus the bottom. The results suggested that individuals who signed the top were less likely to underreport certain metrics, implying that such a simple change could promote honesty. However, upon closer examination by independent researchers, and anomalies in the data were discovered that suggested potential fabrication. They quickly discovered that the superstar researcher reported data that did not align with expected distributions, and then they started finding more and more inconsistencies, raising red flags about his authenticity. Another study, which explored the relationship between dishonesty and creativity, also came under scrutiny. While the original research suggested a link between the two, subsequent replication attempts failed to reproduce the same results. Moreover, questions arose about the origins of the data and the methodology used, further eroding confidence in the study's findings. And perhaps one of the most damning revelations came from a collaboration between Ariely and an auto insurance company, as his study aimed to investigate the honesty of policyholders when reporting odometer readings. However, when the insurance company conducted its own in-house replication, they found significant discrepancies between the data they provided and what was reported in Ariely's study, raising serious concerns about a huge academic leader in behavioral economics' data manipulation and potential fabrication. And the revelations were profound, as Ariely's work has not only influenced academic discourse, but has been taught to students worldwide, informing policy decisions and business strategies, teaching students across the world completely fabricated lies. And yet this isn't just him here, as it's essential to view this controversy within a broader context. It's the culture of academia, the publish or perish mantra, that is leading to more and more compromised ethics. Researchers, especially those at prestigious universities, are always compelled to produce groundbreaking results for a company investor or some wider government board to maintain their funding. And this environment is increasingly leading to questionable research practices. And yet, as trust starts to erode in academic institutions, this means the foundation upon which the scientific community builds its knowledge is starting to crumble. And so what does this mean for students learning this? And if you think it's just Dan Ariely here, there's a whole rabbit hole in the education system with phony research. Dietrich Stapel's Fall from Grace serves as another stark reminder of the fragility of academic reputation. Once a master of social psychology, his career unraveled when a series of investigations revealed a pattern of scientific fraud. A staggering 58 of his papers were retracted, and he was at one of the top universities, one of the top professors. Similarly, Woo-Suk Wang's claims of cloning human embryos, which initially brought him global acclaim, were later debunked as fabrications yet again, leading to more widespread disbelief and condemnation. Mark Tessier-Lavinge's situation, albeit different, added another dimension to the narrative. As the former president of Stanford University, he faced allegations of data fabrication. While he never conceded to any misconduct, he did actually resign from his prestigious post, raising some questions about the standards of Stanford University. And these incidences are never isolated. They're widespread. There's an increasing amount of surveys suggesting that a concerning percentage of scientists have at some point manipulated their data. When asked about their peers, the numbers are even more alarming. Which raises the question, how much of what we're taught at universities, with this information going out into the wider public consciousness, is actually compromised and corrupted by the people funding them? With people like Francisca Gino, a distinguished professor at Harvard University, one of the best universities in the world, where her behavioral science research influencing universities across the world is now being investigated to have multiple discrepancies in her data. And as the situation unfolds, it's becoming clear that there's a huge web of lies at these universities. Universities that students pay hundreds of thousands for, that they've prepped their whole lives for. Students who become the leaders of the world, learning lies from the corrupted education system. Where is this leading mankind to? If our institutions, the place that we spend the first 18 years, and in most cases another 4 years, is actually indoctrinating us into beliefs of someone looking to profit, instead of growing a population of great thinkers, we are still following the Rockefeller mantra of becoming workers. Even today, we still have an outdated system because there is an active interest in corrupting our education system, an active interest in infiltrating and controlling the very essence of knowledge, critical thinking, and the pursuit of truth. This isn't just an academic concern, it's a looming crisis for our entire population, as a compromised education system is doing more than just disseminate misinformation. We are slowly stifling creativity, destroying critical thinking, and molding young minds into being passive recipients rather than active seekers of knowledge. When education becomes a tool for propaganda, it ceases its means of empowerment and instead becomes a mechanism of control, and the long-term implications of this are dire. A society and planet educated under such a system is less likely to push mankind forward, and more likely to be controlled, never questioning authority or never innovating. That's why today, we have a populace that is so easily manipulated, devoid of critical thought, and susceptible to the whims of those in power, which is not only hampering our societal progress, but is setting up a system where this will be impossible to escape. Our education system has repressed billions of lives, and has indebted an entire generation of people to become corporate drones. Institutions once aimed to produce well-rounded, liberal individuals with a broad understanding of culture, history, and governance is now simply producing obedient consumers who have been fed so many lies, who have had their character stamped out of them so badly that nobody is ever turning around and shouting bullshit at the system they've been fed.